Okay, everyone, thank you so much for coming to the Good Neighbor Project. Today's discussion is going to be about privilege. It's entitled Leverage for Good. So we're going to be discussing what exactly privilege is, and more importantly, how we can leverage our personal privilege to benefit those around us. I'm joined by two very special guests here. This is my first time hosting a Good Neighbor Project. So for those of you that don't know, my name is Jackie. I'm the Community Engagement Manager with Goodness Village, and I've been here since the beginning. Thank you. Lots of great supporters in the audience. Today I want to first introduce our two special guests. We have Gregg and Emily Nelson here. I would love for you guys to share how you guys got started at Crosswinds, how you came to know of Goodness Village, and how your personal organizations came to be. Whoever wants to start.
Wow.
You want to tell how we got here? No? Yeah? Yeah, you do that.
Okay. Yeah, so we both, Emily and I, grew up in San Jose and moved up.
Along with Jackie. Who grew
Along
up
with
in San
Jackie.
Bay
Jose.
Area
right.
babies up here.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we moved up here to help with the start of Crosswinds in 1988. And so at that point in time, me and my really good friend then, now business partner, started a little company. At the same time as we came here to work with Crosswinds, and fast forward 36 years, I guess, and here we are. So Emily and I felt like, we were supposed to be part of this new church plant and launch and whatever, and so that's what we did, and still part of Crosswinds. So, anyways.
And also, why we got involved in Goodness Village is we went on a fact-finding trip to Austin. Was it Community First?
Yeah.
Community First.
And we saw a community there, and of formerly unhoused, and how it was just thriving and was meeting the needs in the community, and just hopeful, and continued dreaming about what that would look like on our property, since we had this beautiful property with lots of acres and places for homes. So,
Well, thank you so much for being a part of it from the very, very beginning, before I was even a part of it. That's amazing.
yeah.
So do you want to tell us a little bit more about Truemark Homes first?
So that little company that my friend and I started back in 1988, the name of it is Truemark, and we build houses in various parts of California and in Colorado right now. So we're a home builder primarily. And I guess just background-wise, I was involved in kind of the property side of things for Crosswinds over the years, just because of my particular background. And
You were very hands-on. And I am a founder with 4 other people of the Flourish Collective, and we started that in 2020, which is a giving collective and a racial justice organization and we call ourselves Aspiring Allies, and we're committed to learn, give, and live out justice. And for those we serve, learning means learning a more complete and truthful history of our country. And it also means, looking in ourselves to understand where biases and discriminations and prejudices come from and undo them, basically. We say we learn, unlearn, relearn, repeat. So that cycle is always on repeat, because there's a lot we need to unlearn, relearn. And for those of us, and then we also give our dollars, the giving collective part. So people give to nonprofits led by leaders of color that are doing the work of justice.
Amazing work. So because today's topic is privilege, we first wanted to define what privilege is, because it could look different for different people. Personally, like I told Gregg and Emily when we were doing our preliminary conversations about this discussion, I was telling them that as far as I'm concerned, anyone who grew up in a 2-parent household is already at an advantage and already has a certain level of privilege compared to someone who grew up in an unstable household. So that's what privilege looks like to me. You're at an advantage over someone else in your community who maybe doesn't have that. So did you guys want to talk a little bit more about what exactly privilege means to you or how you would define it?
I'm going to start this one because her definition is so much better than mine. So I always think about it similar to Jackie, to what you described, and that is just growing up with advantages that others didn't have. So it's a pretty general description, but it definitely has a lot of sensitivities around it. And I think that's kind of the second part of your question there is around that. And it's a sensitive label because it can sometimes communicate a message that those who are defined or categorized as privileged should feel guilty and owe those who are not, by definition, privileged. And it's unfortunate that terms like these have become sort of triggering, where it kind of cuts off the conversation just by the very use of a term. And because it kind of can elicit sort of defensiveness, right? And negative reactions, which takes away from the intended purpose of really enlightenment and education and sparking respectful and thoughtful dialogue. So it's kind of an unfortunate aspect of that word and many others that are similar in their usage, but it shouldn't be that way.
And I'm going to get more academic on you.
Told you.
So I'm going to go to the dictionary. Let's go right to the source. And they define privilege as unearned and mostly unacknowledged societal advantage that a restricted group of people has over another group. And privilege can come in different forms. And so we think two-parent household versus one-parent household. Gender can be an advantage. Your handedness. You know, we live in a right-handed world, and you know that if you're left-handed, how those scissors, right, don't cut. Ability versus disability. Unhoused versus housed, and even, you know, what neighborhood you live in, what side of the tracks you live in, how much education or money you have, or even ageism, right? So there's all different kinds of privilege. And then there's something called white privilege as well. So privilege is the ability to go through life without being profiled or unfairly stereotyped. It is unseen and unconscious. So yeah, it is hard to recognize unless we're made aware of it. It's something we inherited being in the dominant group or the majority group. So it's not really meaning favored or having wealth. It's a dominant position because it is the status quo and we are in the majority, whatever group of privilege you're in. Also, we usually see discrimination, biases, and prejudices and racism as a disadvantage to a person or a people group. But can we also recognize that privilege gives certain people an advantage, which we'll talk about more in a bit. But when we don't recognize we have privilege of one kind or another, a hierarchy can develop, or we can be oppressive without even realizing it. We see our privilege as the norm, and other people should aspire to be just like us. Also, our privilege can protect us from harassments and discriminations and even violence. So those are some things to think about as you're thinking maybe what category your privilege may be in.
Nice. I'm so glad that you brought up the different types of privilege, because I feel like a very common misconception, like Gregg was saying, privilege has turned into kind of like a buzzword, so that you hear the word privilege and you might automatically think white privilege and then not think about anything else. So I'm glad you brought up everything else, because even when I was doing my homework for this discussion, I was looking up what are the other types of privilege that there are. Because being a Black woman in a predominantly white space, I think about those things, but I also have to take into consideration, I have a master's degree. So there's the educational privilege. I have a two-parent household. There's that privilege. I have a car that gets me to work every day. There's that privilege. So there's other things to focus on. So how would you guys help explain to somebody how they can acknowledge that there's some stuff that they may not have, but there's a lot of great things that they do have as well?
Yeah, how do you grasp that subject?
You want to go first on this one?
You want me to go first?
Sure.
We didn't really practice that part. Yeah. Okay, so if we realize that privilege is not a preferred or special position based on earning, I think that kind of helps, right? We didn't earn this privilege. For instance, if you were white, maybe you had some ancestors who were dirt poor, and they made something of themselves, and they bought some land, or maybe they bought a house, and maybe they passed it down to you, and you have that generational wealth. In this instance, they were privileged because they had opportunities and they were free to take advantage of them. Whereas a person of color might have also been dirt poor, but they for many years couldn't even own property. So that was a disadvantage. And they couldn't take advantage of like housing loans or the GI Bill, or they were victims of redlining, so their houses couldn't appreciate. So they were not able to take advantage of the same advantages that the privileged group got to take advantage of because of their skin color. Not because of meritocracy, not because they couldn't earn it, they couldn't afford it, or that they earned it, but they were thwarted from participating in the opportunities, and they also were prevented from reaping the economic benefits as opposed to the white dominant group. So in this case, white skin had red carpets and darker skin had slammed doors. But I have some examples of white privilege. Okay, so this is a book that I'm recommending called Waking Up White. It really helped me understand my white privilege, even though we can think of it across the board to our other privileges too. But the Flourish Collective really talks about white privilege. So that's kind of where my wheelhouse is. But think of this. I can go shopping alone most of the time, pretty well assured that I will not be followed or harassed. I can take an affirmative action job without my coworkers wondering if I got hired because of my race. I can arrange most of the time to protect my children from people who don't like them. I can swear or dress in secondhand clothes or not answer letters without having people attribute these choices to the bad morals, the poverty, or the illiteracy of my race. Whether I use checks, credit cards, or cash, I can count on my skin color not to work against the appearance of my financial reliability. I can be pretty sure that my neighbors will treat me neutral or friendly. I can walk around most places without people being suspicious if I belong. So these are just some of the privilege I have as being a white person. But there's also a visual of a Monopoly game. And maybe you've heard this, and this was just really helpful in when we heard this in helping us understand it. Let's say Gregg and I are playing Monopoly. Yes. And, we go around the board several times, and we've got our money, we're buying property, we're putting houses on there and hotels, and we keep going past go and collecting money. We're becoming rich, rich, rich. And then after 2 times around the board, Jackie comes in and says, "Hey, I want to play." And we said, "Sure, that's great." We give her money from the bank, and she rolls the dice and she lands on something. I have a property, pay up. It's my property, pay rent. And like everywhere she goes, she gets dinged, right? She has to pay and pay. And so with every roll of the dice, she becomes broker and broker. And finally, Gregg and I win, and we think we're all that, and we don't think anything of it. And meanwhile, Jackie's very frustrated that she can't even play the game. And I think that's a really good visual example. I want to read this quote from Debbie Irving, the author of Waking Up White. "The more I understand the privilege side of the equation, the more I understand the discrimination side, and vice versa. Until I have a clear idea of what racial and other discriminations look like and feel like, I can't imagine how the lack of it affects my life. Discrimination and privilege are flip sides of the same coin. It's not enough to feel empathy towards people of the downside. Majority culture people must also see themselves on the upside to understand that discrimination results from privilege.
Well, that was beautiful. I really love the visual of the Monopoly game because, and at the end of the game, you guys are celebrating and I'm like, but guys, that wasn't fair. And you're like, but we had the same dice. We played the same game. What do you mean it wasn't fair? So I think that's a really great visual that you pointed out. Mm-hmm. So let's say we understand the concept of privilege. I'm acknowledging all of my privilege. What do I do with all of this power now? Like I was saying earlier, back when I used to volunteer as the volunteer driver for elderly people who couldn't drive anymore, I was like, well, I have a car. I have a driver's license. That's my privilege. So I'm going to use it to take care of someone who can't take care of those things anymore. So for someone who in this room is now like, okay, I'm acknowledging my privilege. I have this power. What do I do with it now? How would you advise them to proceed?
Well, I think the first part of it is kind of being able to see the realities that we're facing. And for me, that was an educational process that really I was kind of following in Emily's wake on that whole education process, but in learning a lot. I guess what I sort of jotted down is that when one comes to realize that they might be in the privileged category, they should look for ways to support efforts that move our society away from the systems that perpetuate division and discrimination. But it's really helpful to invest in some education in order to really better understand what those systems might be or what they might look like, so that you can recognize them, and then, within our own context, I guess, looking for ways to support efforts that move us away from that to a more just structure. So it might take the form of getting involved in an organization like the Flourish Collective, that are active in the education and I would say remediation space. It might mean being intentional on who you choose to support. For example, maybe looking for in this context of white privilege or whatever, looking at BIPOC businesses as an alternative.
Can you explain what BIPOC is?
Oh, so,
Black, Indigenous, people
yes.
of color. Yeah, just in case.
Thank you. So, we all have a choice where we spend our money, and maybe just being a little bit more intentional on how we do that is another thing. Another fairly obvious option is to actually give to organizations that are working to advance equality. And there's a lot of those out there. Again, just takes a little bit of investigation and investment of time. And I think we need to make sure that as we become more educated and enlightened, that we, in our conversations and such with our peers, our friends, and our family or whatever, that we try to stay away from coming across judgmental or critical, which is pretty easy to do if you feel like you've all of a sudden learned all this stuff and the people around you should know this. And so it's easy to kind of develop that sort of tone, I guess you'd say. And so I think working really hard to avoid that is really important. We really need to maintain a posture of humility and openness, I think, if we're going to have constructive dialogue and work together towards, making things better.
So less judgment, more curiosity. Yeah. Educating people in a way that, you're not talking down to them. You're not being condescending. You're not saying I'm better than you because I have all this knowledge now. It's let me educate you because yesterday I didn't know any of this information. So now let me help you get to where I am. And now we can move forward and help the greater community.
Good. I just want to, that was just so well said. And just want to elaborate on a few of those points. So I was saying, first, before we, charge out there and with our, down with privilege signs and start protesting, the first thing we have to do is learn. And that's the first concept of the Flourish Collective. We need to learn a more truthful and whole, history of where we came from in the United States. And I think that's just really important so we know what we're talking about. And we'll see privilege all along the way, and we'll also see the non-privileged fighting for their rights and fighting to even the playing field. But we also examine the advantages we have just by having white skin. And we see that all through our history. How does having privilege open up doors for us? So we need to kind of do this kind of soul searching. Look how we were raised, and, what was caught, or what was taught explicitly or just caught by, our parents' actions regarding people who are different from us. We root our biases and discriminations and prejudices in that upbringing, and learning and awareness are really key to growth in this area. And second, be, as Jackie said, curious with your listening ears. I think we learn that in kindergarten, don't we? So, read or hear or listen to stories about people and experiences who are different from the majority culture. Even if you're in the minority culture, you were really raised in the white dominant culture because that's who taught you. And because you too, so you have been indoctrinated into that culture, so you also need to learn. An Asian woman just this last weekend said to me that the Black culture is very different from her Korean culture. So in order for her to better understand Black culture, she and her husband went to a Black American South trip where she learned about, the history there, their experiences, and she learned and got some understanding firsthand, and what it was like for Black people to endure in our history, and thwarted from them making progress as well. So she did her homework, and it cost her some money to do that too. So I encourage you to read minority culture literature and follow people who are different from you in all the areas on your social networks. Go to places where you are the minority. And that's a very interesting situation there, because curiosity can breed compassion and understanding. I think another really important thing is to get proximate, get close to people who are different from you in a really genuine way. Hear their stories. And of course, you might need to earn their trust first, because retelling their stories could be traumatizing for them to do that. So you have to earn their trust. This takes time, and it's not a one and done type of thing. And really listen to their experiences. Don't come back with any defensiveness or disbeliefs or, yeah, but, or, jump in with your story. Just really be curious and listen, because proximity begets empathy, and that way your empathy muscles will start to grow. And then when you've done those two steps, then you'll be ready to speak up, because you've done your homework, you've listened to stories. And then so when you hear an off-color joke, or you hear some stereotyping, or people using phrases that are hurtful to a group of people, speak up and challenge that statement. Is that statement true, what you said? Is that statement hurtful to some people? And you can do that in a loving way. Maybe that was even a little too, because sometimes, I get my ire up and I've got to learn to simmer down. When we let these little aggression go by, we just let them go, or we just smile, and inside we're saying no, but we don't say anything. It perpetrates the mistruths, and your silence signals that you agree with them. And also, we can use our privilege to make visible the systems of unseen privilege by bringing it up when you notice it. So be courageous. That's another step. This is hard work. And then finally, I would say, help, as Gregg said, transform the system. I mean, that seems so daunting right now, right? But these systems are unseen. But there are some things we can do. We have an election coming up, so we can vote with the justice mindset. And we can vote in a way that doesn't just benefit me and my group, but that benefits the collective whole. We can use our arbitrarily awarded power to transform unjust systems. We can do that locally in our town council meetings, at schools and our school board meetings, at our HOAs, at our workplaces, and even our places of worship. we can use that power to help change things if we see something that's unjust. And another great thing we can do is to hand over power and hand over the microphone to those in marginalized or underrepresented groups. I wanted to share one example that I'm talking a lot, huh? Okay, that's Gregg McIntosh. She wrote The Invisible Backpack, Knapsack of Privileges, and some of them I mentioned earlier. And she talks about that our belief systems is like a hard drive processor, right? We get inputted with millions and millions of bits of information in our belief system and we decide what we want to keep, what's important, what's going to keep us safe, a hierarchy, what is valuable, how to behave in this world. Okay, so our processor is doing that. And the kicker is that most of this happens 85 to 90% of all that we think is formed before our 5th birthday. So, like Gregg says, we don't need to feel guilty or shame, that we're acting like this. It is programmed. We are hardwired to act like this. So that we don't need to have guilt or shame, but we do need to recognize it. And when we do recognize it, then we can do something with it. And while we can't go back to our childhood and reprogram our neural pathways, we can create new software that will help make new neural pathways. And that's been proven in brain science. And that will help us to detect omissions and untruths and rewire us for a more just self. So those are some things we can do.
Nice. I love that you were honest and said that it's not easy, because some people will think, if I just read this book, maybe I'll understand everything now. If I watch this TED Talk, now everything makes sense.
Because we want to check off the box. I watched that movie. I read that book.
Exactly. I sat and chatted with Emily. Now everything clicks. But it's not easy. And like you were saying in the beginning, it takes unlearning. Like before you're 5 years old, like you kind of don't stand a chance. So it takes a lot of unlearning, relearning, sometimes unlearning again because you relearned incorrectly, and then learning again. Yeah, so I like that you were honest about that.
Forever.
Mm-hmm. And I really also appreciate the story you told about the Asian woman who didn't understand Black culture and immersed herself in it in order to understand it better. That's where the curiosity comes from. Because she just as easily could have said, well, I don't understand Black culture and that's just the way it's going to be. And a lot of people do that. With our volunteer visitor program, it's me kind of shaking people's notion of what homelessness really is. Because their whole lives, I see somebody on the side of the road and they must be on drugs, or it must be mental health, or it has to be something that put them in that situation, where sometimes people are just put in that situation. So I like that you were very honest about that. It does take a lot of unlearning, putting yourself in the environment, and then educating yourself that way. But you did mention the voting ballot, and I know that Flourish Collective has something called Elevate Your Vote. So would you like to talk more about that? Because I think that's a really great initiative you guys have.
Yes, so we just had a class called Elevate Your Vote, and it was last week, and where we talk about what our voting can do. And sometimes we think voting at the national level, and that's getting a lot of press these days, is like the main thing. But actually, voting at your local level is really so much more important, because those issues and those candidates affect you even more so than the national level. Whatever's voted at the national level might not even affect you until years down the line. And your national level vote can help you maybe even mitigate something that is happening at the national level. So I encourage you to vote your values, vote what is just for your community, and not just what will raise your position and give you the benefit, but how can we vote for the collective whole? I think that's just a great mindset. Will better our communities.
Yeah, and a lot of people are like, well, my vote doesn't matter. It's just one vote. But that mindset is gonna change what's on the ballot next year or who's in office. So it's really important to know who you're voting for and understanding what's going on. And understanding that your vote does matter. This is not an election situation. I'm just making sure you guys know your vote matters. I also wanted to know more about True Charities, because I think that is another great initiative. If you could tell us about that, please.
So as I mentioned before, the name of the company I'm part of is TrueMark, and from the beginning we've tried to find ways of giving back along with operating our business. I guess the main thing that we have been involved with from a financial perspective and kind of focus in that space is a partnership that we've pursued for a number of years with an organization called Charity Water. And basically their mission is to provide clean water for communities that don't have reasonable access to that. And it really affects, of course, the community and the way they live their lives. And so if they can bring water, which usually it's involved drilling a well and setting up the infrastructure so that they can harvest the water from the ground rather than, in some cases, walking several miles to get water and then several miles back. So TrueMark has partnered with them, like I said, for a number of years, supporting their work as they're in operating their mission. So our commitment, just as an example, is we have committed to provide water for 200 people for every 50 homes that we sell. So basically it kind of reflects, if you thought about a family of 4 moving into a home, and that's kind of, so we want to try to provide clean water for a family of 4, if you will. So that's sort of that ratio. And it's been a great privilege. I think we're approaching 20,000 people that we've been able to help provide water for, which has been, a wonderful privilege. And it's been neat to see how the organization, how all of the coworkers have kind of gotten behind that mission. And, we try to make sure we publicize that and help people to understand that the work they do is generating this ability. So,
and even the homeowners too, right?
Yes, we do. Yeah. So when somebody buys a TrueMark home, when they move in, there'll be, well, first of all, when they walk in the sales office, there'll be something on the wall that talks about this whole endeavor. And then if they buy a home and they move in, then there's we put little hangers on the faucets and stuff that talk about Charity Water and kind of basically trying to help them to feel part of the process that, hey, when you bought this house, here's what happened, 4 people someplace else in the world are now being able to enjoy, clean water that is life-changing for them and their community. So, just some little way to try to do that.
Yeah, and I think that's great. One, because of the work that you're doing, but also getting people involved because they may not even realize that they had the power to do something like that. And through buying a house with you guys, they're able to do something like that. So it's kind of putting in their head their own power and privilege and recognizing what they're capable of doing. So I think that's great. And could you guys tell us if you have had any instances where people may have been skeptical, or why are you guys doing this? Because you very well could keep all of your money in-house. You could just say, well, we're not going to do charities. We're just going to keep building more houses. So have you ever had anyone that you've come across at any stage that said, why are you guys doing this when you can be doing something for yourselves, going on vacations, taking care of your family, all that kind of stuff?
Well, in the TrueMark context, even in our personal lives, as far as my experiences is not really. I think most people see the value of working to help those that are less fortunate and promoting equality. I think most people have that mindset. It's just a matter of whether it's prominent or not, maybe in their lives. But I haven't had anybody sort of question what we're doing. I think most people maybe just don't get involved because they don't necessarily think about it. And as I mentioned before, some of the ways that we've tried to promote what we're doing as a company is to help people feel like they are part of it, and maybe that will help elevate the consciousness, so that they find other ways to give back. And we've seen that happen too, which is great. So, I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't had anybody, push back on me. Why are you giving this money here? But since Flourish is dedicated to undoing racism, I've had pushback there. It's because many people believe that Yes, there are racist people in the United States, but there is not systemic racism in the United States. And that is exactly why we designed what we call our table talks. And these are online classes where we invite panel experts come in, and we have a learning arc, and it's where does racism exist in? And every class, we've talked about education, healthcare, policing, the environment. Where does racism exist in the criminal justice system, in our workplace, in housing and wealth accumulation, in the immigration system, and in our churches? So because of that pushback, we've developed programming to help people understand that. And some people also believe that the answer is to just treat people like you would want to be treated, do unto others, or love your neighbors as yourself, and so on. Now, while these are certainly great practices, if this were the answer to just do that, then we wouldn't have racism still rearing its ugly head today. And even if we all did this, treated others like we wanted to be treated, there are still systems in place that are not fair and equitable and just, and those need to be changed. So that's kind of the pushback when people don't want to do anything. I said, we need kindness and we need action. We need them both together.
Nice. Well, I would love for us to end on a positive note. If you guys could maybe share a success story. I'm sure Emily, you have plenty of them, but I would love to hear something successful that has come about in your organization that really stuck with you.
You go first? Okay. Oh, I'd be happy to, because I'm really proud of the accomplishments that Flourish has done in the last 4 years. We have 180 community members, and we always welcome more. So we'd love for you to join us, who are learning and giving and living out justice in their sphere of influence. And we have had close to 1,300 people attend at least one of our 80 learning classes. So that's a broad appeal. And we're nationwide because of the pandemic, we had to be on Zoom, but that was actually a benefit for us. And then we have given to 17 organizations doing justice who are led by leaders of color, which we call our impact partners. And we give them unrestricted grants. That means that we trust them, these leaders, to put the money where they need it most, whether it's for programs, payroll, or printer ink. We don't care because we trust them. And that's called trust-based philanthropy. And then we have given away over $245,000 in grants to this day. So we're really proud of that.
That's amazing. We love unrestricted grants in the nonprofit world.
Yes, you too.
Well, I guess I already mentioned, kind of in the context of TrueMark, sort of what, the progress we've been able to make in terms of providing clean water in other parts of the world. And I think also, as I did mention too, for me, just observing how people in our organization have responded to that and resonate with that mission has been really rewarding for me. And then just being part of Flourish, albeit from the sidelines, more or less, and watching what's been accomplished there has been really amazing too, and inspiring for me.
Nice. Well, we did talk very heavily about educating ourselves. So do you guys have any book recommendations for us? We're giving you guys homework today. Do you have any book recommendations or anything that we can take home with us to educate ourselves better on privilege?
She has a lot. So let me start.
Yeah, but I only gave you a few because, I have a big book list and see me for some more. But this one was really pivotal as far as understanding white privilege. It's called Waking Up White. She was born the exact year I was born in, only she was born on the East Coast. I was born here. And we both were part of, charity and helping people and missions and bringing culture to those inner city kids. And it's just like, we missed the boat in so many ways. And this is her journey into undoing racism in her life. And then I have an article that it's called the Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, Peggy McIntosh, who talks a lot about privilege in general, and helps you be more aware. And I got a lot of my stuff tonight through her, so she's really great too. What's your book?
Well, a book that was really instrumental for me early on in the Flourish Collective that was basically recommended by them was called The Color of Law. And given my background in real estate, I kind of resonate with this. It's a forgotten history of how our government segregated America. And it talks a lot about some of the things that happened as America was developing housing and zoning laws and all this kind of stuff, which of course I knew about, so to speak. In other words, I understand what they're talking about, but the story they were describing in our history was really it was hard to read, hard to learn, and just to learn all the missed opportunities that we've had in our history is just like such a bummer. How easily things could have been different if we just not done this one thing or had actually followed through on a promise we made here. And so anyway, so this was really impactful for me in that regard.
And it's true, like the learning can be uncomfortable, right? When we're unearthing this stuff and you're like, what the heck? This happened. And when we're seeing this stuff in ourselves, it can be very uncomfortable. So I think the challenge is to stay in the uncomfortableness, because that's going to spur you to change and to help make this world a better and just place for all.
Mm-hmm. The discomfort is where the growth happens. Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Well, thank you for coming. Thank you for doing this with us. Thank you for giving us so much information. I would love to open up the floor to the audience to ask any questions of any of us. Jade's going to pass around the mic. Please let her hold on to the mic. That would be amazing. You can just throw your hand up, let her know if you have any questions or not. This was very informative.
A question that I have, but I wanted to share something that I had seen a few years ago where they had lined up a bunch of people of all different races and asked them questions. Have you ever been arrested? Have you, been stopped by a cop? Have you gone to prison? Have you ever bought a house? A lot of different questions. And then when it was all done, you could just see the differences. That all the white people were up front and all the minorities were at the back, and it was just a really good visual example of how things happen and how people are treated, and it's just made a big gap,
and how that privilege benefited those in the front group, right? Yeah.
And that was probably a lot of people's first opportunity, even witnessing the disparity. So that's a really powerful visual. Thank you for sharing that.
What advice would you give for someone that, in those times of being able to speak up for someone, but it's met with a little bit of opposition from, maybe close family or friends, that's people that you have to interact with a lot and then not some stranger, right? What advice would you give?
Well, thanks for asking that question. I actually had kind of written something that I haven't shared yet, but I think might apply to that. I did, just where we're at in our society is really unfortunate. I feel like if we can avoid, using trigger words like I mentioned before, like privilege, systemic racism, these even making America great. These are all phrases that communicate positive things to the people that are using them, but they also carry so much baggage depending on the context, right? So if we can stay away from them, because we don't really care about making people use a vocabulary that we find critical or important, I don't think. What we really care about is exchanging ideas and helping educate one another and find common ground. So I think that's one place to start. And then I think it hopefully helps us have a better chance as individuals and a society to engage in respectful and thoughtful dialogue, which is really where progress is made, not in just yelling at each other from opposite sides of, the issues. So then the other part I would mention is trying to find common ground with others rather than starting with a focus on the differences. Because I think that realize that different perspectives on certain issues or beliefs doesn't mean we don't share most things in common, right? Probably we do. If we could set aside that one issue that we really hate each other over and get to know each other as human beings, we'd find that most of our stuff our views are held in common. And so starting hopefully with that, looking for that common ground rather than a focus on the differences, I think is really helpful. As I mentioned, social media is really that's really exacerbated this whole problem because it caters to the more radical sides of issues, and its anonymous structure allows people to really be their worst self because they're not face to face with someone, and that's really unfortunate. I guess the final thing I would mention is try to stay away from judgment, either in words or tone, because all of us, and I think recognize all of us are capable of being judgmental, right? Especially when we learn new things and we feel like we're right, and we're talking with somebody who is obviously ignorant about whatever, it's easy to be judgmental, and we're all capable of that. And yet none of us wants to be judged, do we? So I think if we recognize that in ourselves, that could be really helpful in productive conversations.
Yeah, I would add to that is this is really where you need your curious compassion. Invite them to dinner, not a duel. And it's we say at Flourish, the goal is to have it's not win a debate, not change their mind, but to have another conversation. If you have a duel, you might not ever talk again. But if you are open and curious, really curious, genuinely about their point of view, even though you really don't agree with it at all, but then they will feel heard and understood, and maybe they don't have to yell. And maybe they're like, oh, you're a safe person I can talk about this with, even though I know we don't agree on it, but we can keep talking about it. And that's really helped me. Another phrase that has helped me when people are, just really on their bandwagon or their pedestal, and they're, saying so vehemently, what they believe, is like, oh, not everybody feels that way, or not everybody thinks that way, or, there's other ways to think about that. Would you be interested in hearing about that? And just asking the question and offering. They might say no, but they might say yes, and you might get to share your side. But it's really hard if you're related, I guess. So you just don't talk about those subjects, right? How's the weather today? But if we can do it compassionately and with curiosity, hopefully that could help.
Any more questions? Final call. Alrighty. Well, thank you all for coming and spending your Monday evening with us. We have plenty of snacks for you to enjoy. We will be linking the articles and the books that we discussed, so you guys can do your homework and no excuses. We hope that you can join us for the next discussion. We will be posting that all over our socials, so you know when that is. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks for coming. Thank you.